sort of first major historical event in your memory? When you were a child, teenager, or young adult? Many people here might remember the day that JFK was assassinated. You might remember where you were when you saw the final chopper leaving Saigon. My earliest memory like that, difficult memory, was the Challenger Shuttle explosion. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was hopeful. We were at school. The teacher turned on the television, and then a few minutes later turned it off and tried to explain to a bunch of 9-year-olds what had just happened. There are events like these. They become landmarks in our memories, and they affect us to very different degrees. If you were behind JFK all the way, if you sort of knew, loved his message, you loved who he was, or if you had a family member or friend who served in Vietnam, those events, they have long kind of personal, family, even community-wide effects. It can be like a storm that sets down and it really doesn't lift for a long, long time. The storm, I remember in my young adulthood best, of course, is September 11th. On September 11th, 8:30 in the morning, I was in New York City studying to be a minister. About 10 minutes into class, a friend ran into the room and said, "You've got to come see this. A plane has hit the North Tower." About 70 of us ran downstairs to a television just in time to see the South Tower hit. Hour and a half later, they're both down. I spent the next 3 years in New York City. The effect of that experience, of being there for that, it lasted obviously much longer than just that day. For example, for about a year and a half or 2 years, I walked everywhere. I didn't take the subway. I just couldn't kind of bring myself to do it. I also did a lot less socializing than I normally do. I didn't kind of feel like making friends, didn't go out as much as I used to, became kind of defensive, even a little bit fearful. A storm of that kind can have those effects. And we grow when we see those effects more clearly, when we own them kind of honestly in our own lives. When we ask also this question, what is God up to in all of this? How does he mean to change me by this? If God is God, then God is involved somehow. You might be tempted to say that he's not, but he is. You can press into that and persevere in asking and discovering, Lord, show me. What do you want from me out of all of this? Or you can shut it down, even when God comes to you in the middle of a storm. March 2020, right? We had another storm kind of set down, not just on us, but on the entire world. And we've lived through something that really you'd have to go back 100 plus years or more to understand, a pandemic. It's like a storm that made all of us go to our boats and paddle hard for the other side. What has God been saying to you in this storm? What is God up to? I believe one of the things is a deep and abiding call to prayer, to return to prayer if we've left it to one side. It hasn't been a living part of our lives personally and our lives together as a church. Prayer transforms our hearts to be more like the Good Shepherd, to make us, hopefully, more gentle, more gracious, more forgiving, eager to heal, to seek healing, and to be healed. The other thing I sense God calling us to do is to follow the example of Peter in this story. Peter, really. Doesn't Peter begin to sink when his faith is weak, wavering, not strong enough? Yes, Peter sinks. Peter's also the first of the disciples to call out to Jesus, to stand up and step off the boat. First, Peter, like many of us in our boats, it's not clear if it's really Jesus calling to the disciples in the storm. Lord, if that is you, command me. Been many voices calling to us in this storm of almost 2 years now. Some worth listening to, some definitely not. But the voice we've needed most of all, it's been the voice of Jesus. When we hear his voice, we, like Peter, we have to stand up. We have to respond. We have to take that first step. And notice what happens when Peter does. The storm does not stop immediately. It continues. In fact, Peter begins to sink. The storm is still raging. What matters is that Peter's taken one more step toward Jesus. He knows that it's him coming to them on the water. Because he's taken that step, he's closer to him. He can reach out to Jesus when things are getting even worse. Until this point, Peter and the disciples, they hadn't really experienced personally distress or hardship in their relationship, in their ministry with Jesus. In fact, they probably felt bold. They were the 12 who'd been chosen. They were selected, set apart. They'd been with him. They'd been taught personally by him. They'd seen many of Jesus' miracles. They'd mainly known the benefits of following him. But then Jesus sends the crowds away. Why would you do that, Jesus? It's kind of nice to have all these people around us. Makes us feel important. Makes the disciples get in the boat. Okay, guys, row to the other side. Jesus, the last time we got on a boat together, then Jesus withdraws by himself to pray. Kind of an act of isolation or two, right? You guys go be on your own. I'm going to go be on my own and pray. It took more than 9 hours for the disciples to reach the part of the journey where the storm started. We bet at about 8.5 hours, the disciples started to wonder, has he called us together only to send us away, only to desert us? Has he put us on this boat because we did something wrong? Is this how Jesus fires disciples? Okay, guys, see you later. No. Jesus puts the disciples on the boat to get them to do what Peter did. Stand up, call out, trust in him, walk with him. To leave fear behind, to leave behind their small idea of who Jesus was, just the benefits, just the good stuff, just the feeling of being chosen, that he was the one who was getting them all the awesome stuff. To do that, we too have to, like Peter, we've got to take off, got to kind of leave behind something that's insulated us from experiencing God, not just knowing about him, but experiencing him. At the beginning of the pandemic, if you remember this, we often saw people walking around in hazmat suits. Do you remember that? Perhaps that made sense early on. We didn't know what we were dealing with. That image, it stuck with me as we've continued to live through more than 2.5 years of pandemic. It seems to stand for the isolation that's been thrust upon us, right? But also some isolation, some practices of isolation that we've chosen. Hazmat suit, right? It protects us from something dangerous, deadly, something we might not know about, something we fear. But spiritually, maybe until that point, and even since the point of the pandemic touching down, we've been wearing hazmat suits of kind of no prayer, no worship, no Sabbath rest, no living relationship with God. A personal faith that's all about kind of me and my walk, but it's not about coming together as a family of Christ. Hazmat suits made of too busy. I'm not sure. I don't know. Hazmat suits that seem very comfortable, but they protected us from the source of life. Peter's the first to take his hazmat suit up. He stands up, he walks to Jesus. He falters, he begins to sink. That faith, that boldness, though, it really is what changes the world, even when it's imperfect, even when it's mixed with fear. It's easy to criticize Peter. It's easy to criticize others when they begin to sink. Or to criticize yourself. Maybe that's who you are. That's your tendency to beat up on yourself, criticize yourself when you begin to sink. The critic who points out your imperfect faith, the voice in your head that says, I can't get started unless my faith is perfect and strong. Those two voices are not God's voice. They're not the voice of Jesus, calling to you, who has called to you and calls to you today, still in the middle of this side of the storm. The voice continues to concern me as the one calls for social distancing. In some sense, still very necessary. Some of us naturally also desire time alone. If you're kind of a natural introvert, maybe this much time alone has been kind of like, yes, this is what I've been looking forward to. But Andy Stanley, popular pastor and author, has written this about the effects of isolation. They really do kind of four things to us. Cause us to lose perspective. There's no objective voice outside of us calling us to balance. He says, our lows tend to be lower. Our highs tend to be higher. Does that sound familiar? Has that been your experience in the past couple of years? Simple decisions, he writes, can appear bigger than life. Simple decisions and decision-making can become more impulsive, kind of ready to press the eject button, ready to do something new when we don't have something to point us back to our true north. Second thing, we can grow to fear intimacy more and more. People who haven't had close relationships, they're not going to grow. They actually regress more in social isolation. And the third thing, people become, no surprise, more selfish. Kind of hoard, nerves fray, family time together gets way more choppy than it kind of naturally is. Last thing, poor health. John Ortberg, another pastor, tracked relationships in the lives of 7,000 people over 9 years. Isolated people 3 times more likely to die. Even if you had bad habits but strong social ties, you're more likely to live significantly longer. The best way to put that, it's better to eat Twinkies together than broccoli alone. It's my mantra. So isolation, right? Not so good for us, but we've had it. It's been thrust upon us. What I'm asking you about today is, to what extent have you also taken more of it into your life than you should have? Now it seems we've come this side of the storm. We're inching our way out. We're not out completely. So what might God be up to in all of this? Is God speaking to you in this crisis? Let's look again at the story from Matthew's gospel. The experience of the disciples in that boat, it has something important to say to us now. At the outset, Jesus does 3 things, right? They set the stage for what he wants his disciples to experience, right? Being in a boat in a storm in the middle. It's not like a lesson that he taught them. It's a deep experience that they feel in their hearts and minds. He makes them get in the boat. He dismisses the crowds. He goes by himself up the mountain to pray. Disciples had been with Jesus, right? They'd been with him in the middle of a very crowded, busy life, a busy ministry, all day, all night, all the time together. A lot of teaching, healing, kind of never-ending demands and opportunities. But now Jesus says, go get on that boat, row for the shore. Crowds, hey, everybody, go home. I'm going up the mountain to pray. Again, Jesus' plan in all of this, what is it? What's another aspect of this plan? It's to get the disciples alone, that they would grow in faith through prayer, that they would grow in faith through prayer. One of the central prayers of this episode, disciples on the boat, Lord, help me. It's a prayer. If you read the Psalms, Mark knows, you read the Psalms, crying out, Lord, help me. When we're busy, when we're submerged in the crowdedness of everyday life, it's very easy to run from God, leave him at the margins. I think life before the pandemic, it seems to me, it was kind of like that. But now, 2+ years in later, I hope God has gotten our attention. We need more rest. We need more Sabbath time. And God is providing that rest, drawing our lives and our mind, our focus to it so that we can turn to him, rededicate our lives to him. Imagine all the things the disciples were doing in the boat as the storm touched down, kind of gripping the side of the boat more tightly, getting out their paddles, throwing their hands in the water, starting to row for shore, crying out in fear. There's no shame in any of that. I would have done the same thing. It's one thing they didn't do, right? They weren't all together in prayer, united in prayer and trust. Jesus was already praying for them, and his prayer was enough. Jesus wants a deep, rich, and enduring prayer life for those who follow him. To have faith in the middle of the storm, we must be a people who pray. To have faith in the middle of a storm, we must be a people who pray. You've needed prayer in this strange time that we've lived through. Your family, your children have needed to be led in prayer. There's no app, right? There's no YouTube video that's going to do that for you. No quick fix. We, all of us, have been called to lead our families, our friends, our community in prayer. So if you haven't already, begin to pray together at the dinner table, on the phone with family and friends. Pray over Zoom meetings if you're still doing that. I pray that this time apart, it's not quite over yet, is it? Has and will become a time for us to do this. Establish a deep, rich, lasting legacy of prayer in our church, in our families, in our personal lives. Your spouse, your children, your family, your friends need more than they can say to see you pray, not just on Sunday, but every day. Prayer. It's how we reach out in faith to Jesus. And friends, when you reach out, know this. The other thing I sense God saying to each of us on this side of the storm, it's a word especially for our deacons, our elders and trustees. We're being called back into service today. You've been called in this time to become more like the Good Shepherd, to show his heart for every man, woman, and child in this community, in this church, and in the North Fork. The difficulty, the perseverance, the humbling experience of the past 2 years and more, I hope, has given you a greater sense of what it is to be in the same boat together and to reach out to people who are desperately swimming toward our boat. So elders, deacons, and trustees, in all that you do, reach out. Reach out with the Good Shepherd's hand and a heart fashioned after the Good Shepherd's heart. To those we serve, to those who do not yet know Jesus Christ, reach out with both hands, the word and our service. It's our honor. It's our privilege. The same spirit that the disciples received over 2,000 years ago, elders, deacons, trustees, is the one that's about to be imparted to you for one reason: to build his church by his word and his spirit. Are you ready? Are you ready to receive him? In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. I'd like to invite our new trustee. I think Bill is here. Yeah, Bill, come on up. I'm going to invite others up too, Bill. It's not just going to be you, but come on up. Our returning elders. So Ed is here. Come on up. Yeah. And Ruth Ann. Our deacons also, returning deacons, come on up. There we go. And sorry, we're going to go down there.